The number 2 ranked flyweight welcomes the number 2 ranked strawweight into the 125-pound division. Coming up this weekend, it is Nice, France's own, the Beast. It's pronounced Manon Fiorot. She's going to be taking on Thug Rose Namajunas, representing Arvada, Colorado, as well as Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And when you look at this fight, Matt, Rose Namajunas punched her ticket into the UFC's Hall of Fame. Multiple-time strawweight champ is Rose Namajunas. But her last time out, one of the worst fights you're ever going to see in the UFC. It was the rematch against Carla Esparza, and as you'll remember, the Ultimate Fighter Season 20 finale for the belt at strawweight. Namajunas loses a fight to Esparza in the rematch. They didn't really do much of anything.
Oh, it's so bad.
And Namajunas doesn't get it done against Esparza for the second time. So now she gets to take a lot of time off. We've seen her in limited action, a Fury Pro grappling series against Jillian Robertson, where it was over as quick as it began, and Robertson got the submission win inside of a minute, or at least just around a minute. So for Namajunas, gets to bring it in. And for Namajunas against Fiorot, we'll see how it works out in some of those striking exchanges. We know Thug Rose has that crazy head kick, the knockout over not just Joanna, but Weili as well. And we know how good Rose's grappling is when she's on. And for Fiorot, from what we've seen in the UFC, not just the early finishes over Tabitha Ricci, who came in up a weight class, or Victoria Leonardo, but the subsequent wins, the super win over Maida Bueno Silva, who's looked good at 135. I know that positive drug test might cloud some things for people, but Fiorot was awesome on that night. And her last time out against Caitlin Chookagian, decision win there. Wasn't the most appealing of fight that I've ever seen. But for Fiorot, we've even seen her win over some good grapplers. I reference it all the time. Quebec's Corinne Laframboise. And when I did it years ago, it was like, Corinne Laframboise, she's not very good. She fights on Contender Series next week, and she's now the UAE Warriors.
So if she wins, she'll be in the UFC, guys. Guess what?
Corinne Laframboise, pretty darn good. So, Matt, even going back and watching the Laframboise fight today, Laframboise, Jiu-Jitsu black belt, Fiorot's the one taking her down and landing ground and pound before she's able to get the finish with her strike standing. So for Fiorot, you know her for the hut, the Kia. You know her for that crazy side kick. But we'll see how she's able to make out against one of the all-timers in 11-5, Rose Namajunas.
Rose Namajunas is the Chris Paul of MMA. I have said this for a very long time, and I'm going to stay by it. She's also lost a good... You don't become 11-5 by being immortal and great at everything, so how about we settle down a bit? For Rose Namajunas, she outthinks her opponents, and that's how she gets a lot of the wins. Is she the biggest physical fighter in the division? No, not really. Like, she's kind of thin. Is she the best grappler? No, but she's a talented enough grappler to where if you take her down, it's a really difficult position to be in because she can threaten with submissions. She does do a great job of taking the back herself. I know you bring up the Carla Esparza matchup coming off the Ultimate Fighter where she gets choked out, but if you go back and watch any of her fights after that, she really has been able to level up her game, fight in and fight out. And I understand that last fight against Esparza wasn't very good. It was her being very tentative against the takedown attempt and not really throwing a lot on the outside. And then we just had two ladies look at each other in the mirror for the majority of it. But for Rose, when she is able to deceive her opponent and make them do things they don't want to do, she can have a ton of success. And I know it doesn't always work out for her, right? She held on to the armbar a little bit too long against Andrade in their first fight and got slammed on her head. But in the rematch, especially in those first two rounds, the third one got a little iffy. But in the first two rounds, she did a great job of using her speed and her range to go out there and win moments and win rounds in that matchup. But even though I'm going to make fun of myself in this fight reminds me a little bit of Weili Zhang's last matchup against Amanda Lemos. I said, hey, Weili is better at pretty much everything, right? She's a very talented striker, but we know she can go for wrestling. She has good ground and pound. She has good submissions herself. Manon Fiorot, to me, is at least built a little bit like Amanda Lemos in this matchup. I think on the feet, her power is going to be enough to at least make Rose uncomfortable on the outside. And yes, I acknowledge the fact that last time I said that, Weili won like a 50-10 in that matchup. She looked very good, but again, I just think Fiorot's going to have a lot more success than people just might assume because of the body of work that Namajunas has and some of the fights that she's been in, some of the all-time great fights. Even look at the Joanna matchups. But for Fiorot, is she going to be able to keep it off the mat and at least avoid some of the feints of Namajunas? Because Namajunas does a great job shifting her hips, shifting her feints, and really making people move into her shots. The Weili head kick is a great example of that. It's not the most powerful head kick of all, but she feints the leg kick, makes Weili do the wrong thing, and then hits her in the head. So I think Namajunas, with all that being said, has all the keys to win, but it is difficult to predict a win just based on her deception of her opponent.
And I mean, for Namajunas, we joke and we say it in jest, 11-5, it's 12-5 if you include a 3-round win from the Ultimate Fighter season. 20, but if you look at it for Namajunas, performance of the night, win over Paige Van Zandt.
The Michelle Watterson fight was super dominant.
Won over Joanna in the first fight, and then won over Zhang Wei Li. Fight of the nights against Jessica Andrade. Both of those fights were fight of the nights, and that was a 2-round fight of the night, the first one, where Andrade slams, and a fight of the night against Karolina Kowalkiewicz as well, where she wasn't on the winning end of that one because she struggled at the end of the range and against a lot of the strikes.
Too.
Like Manon Fiorot will do. Manon Fiorot, 5-0 since coming into the UFC in 2021. She was on EFC's The Fighter, which is their version of The Ultimate Fighter. She won that. She goes to UAE Warriors, has really good success during the pandemic times. But for Fiorot, I mean, you look at the 2 wins that she's had in her last 2 fights. Jennifer Maia, big step up in competition from where she was. Again, even from Buena Silva to Jennifer Maia, and then to Caitlin Chukagian, and just continues to win with striking on the outside, good crisp boxing, and we know the lineage that Fiorot has coming out of the boxing squad. So if you look at this matchup, Fiorot is favored to the tune of almost a 2-1. We look at the Topology votes. Surprised us they are to you. You can set them. I don't know.
I'm going to say 72% Fiorot.
I'm going to say under. And it is
That's
under.
pretty close, though.
1,409 total votes. 69% Fiorot. 80% by decision. For the 31% that have Namajunas, 68% by decision. Matt, I have a hard time in Rose Namajunas fights. You know why? Because I don't know what version of Rose Namajunas I'm going to get from one fight to the next. I don't know if it's going to be tentative and grappling. I don't know if it's going to be strike heavy. I don't know where the game plan's at because it can shift a lot and she can really make things difficult and mix things up that way. But I feel like she's a fighter that likes to stick to that game plan regardless. And that's why I struggle. I anticipate Namajunas going for a lot of takedowns in this one, trying to go grapple heavy, and she could very well win out that way too.
I've got Thug Rose in the matchup. I do. I think on the outside, she's going to eat some shots as a result of it, but she has a pretty good chin. Like, we've seen her in crazy fights. Andrade teed off on her in the 3rd round of their matchup. Very different striker to Fiorot, though. Fiorot's not going to march forward with no head movement or anything and just throw wild hooks from both sides. I think Rose can be able to take the back of Manon Fiorot, though, even if it's standing. I think she's going to be able to do a good job of getting around the hips, circling to the back, and just climbing up her like a spider monkey. So I do have Rose Namajunas in the matchup. I'll be very curious to see how she looks at 125, though. Again, she's not the biggest fighter for 115, but she does have a frame that could gain some weight onto it, and it might help her overall strength in the matchup. And if that is the case, it should make some of those submissions a little bit easier to pursue. I have a hard time with the fight because of how good Fiorot has looked, especially in this recent run, but I do think Rose Namajunas has that little extra X factor that's going to be able to get her the win.
Namajunas hasn't fought at flyweight since her amateur days in 2011. So, 12 years later...
Robert Whittaker never fought at middleweight until he did, and then he won the title, so...
You can make examples for and against. I think Rose Namajunas gets the win in this one because Manon Fiorot stands at a karate stance and leaves her susceptible to getting taken down in a fight like this. So, for me, I like Rose Namajunas, but I hate picking Rose Namajunas fights because I'm not good at it, and her game plan from fight in to fight out is always different. And it's hard to do a lot of tape study to get ready for a fight. So Matt, both of us going with Thug Rose to get the win in the matchup. Now it's a tough ask against France's own in this co-main event. In the main event, it's a similar matchup. Striker versus grappler. Sergey Spivac out of Moldova taking on France's Cyril Gane, the former interim champ. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say.
Let's get into it.